If I talk to you about ancient Egypt, you're going to tell me pyramid, you're going to tell me temple, you're going to tell me pharaoh, Akhenaton, All-in-Kamen, or even Ramses. You're also going to tell me unsolved mystery. Well, you're right. But in all this tumult, as fabulous as intriguing and well, comes a very small thing, a big thing even. A detail that is not one, and that comes to shake up the history of Egypt a little bit, but which is much less known. This is the unfinished obelisk of Aswan, attributed to Hatshepsut the pharaoh. Around 1500 before Christ, the erection of the Aswan obelisk never saw the light of day. That's why today we still have what is called the unfinished obelisk of Aswan. So, how did the Egyptians first carve the obelisk, and then how did they plan to remove it from its bed? Officially, it is believed that the obelisk was shaped using dolerite balls. As for the extraction, no one has ventured into assumptions about shaping with these dolerite balls. One person has risen by proposing an alternative. If you follow the chain, you know this person. This is Claude Obelisk, whom you have already seen in videos, the link to which you will obviously find in the description. And this same gentleman has also made proposals to extract the obelisk, with even a scale demonstration, both in size and density. A demonstration that you can also find in the description if you haven't seen it yet. But very recently, he made an absolutely astonishing discovery which undermines both the shaping with balls. So, this official version, and it also undermines the reason why the construction site would have been abandoned. Indeed, it is said that this construction site was abandoned due to one or more cracks that jeopardized the execution of the project. Absolutely pharaonic in every sense of the word. Yet, thanks to this discovery he just made, and well, two birds with one stone, no pun intended, he completely cancels out the theory of balls and the theory. And that's a first, I think, maybe worldwide, of abandoning the project due to the presence of a fault. This discovery is quite minor. It's a crack in the master, and in this video you're going to see how he's going to explain to us how making a crack in the master, it's not technical, reassure you. How? The realization of a crack cannot be compatible with shaping with dolerite balls, and it cannot be compatible either with a possible abandonment of the site due to fault cracks in this obelisk. It's absolutely breathtaking what he found. He will explain all of this in the video, to such an extent that it risks undermining the serenity of the ghosts of the 19th and 20th century explorers. Speaking of ghosts, I want to take a brief moment to acknowledge and thank the partner of this video, CyberGhost Virtual Private Network. Because, well, personally, I don't know about you, but I'm not particularly keen on having my data stolen and someone knowing absolutely everything I do on the internet. Because without a virtual private network, what happens when we surf freely on the internet? Every click we make is recorded, and we soon realize our personal data is accessible and sometimes even resold. So there comes a time when it has to stop. But precisely, CyberGhost allows you to completely maintain your anonymity and secure your personal data. It's impossible for anyone to know what we're looking at, where we're connecting from, etc. In short, we become a real ghost, but that's not all. It also allows access to blocked content. For example, on Netflix. Depending on the country we connect from, not the same content is accessible. Well, with CyberGhost Boom, everything is unlocked. You just need to virtually connect from the country you want, and you get access to everything that was previously blocked. This applies to over 35 streaming platforms. So honestly, we're good. Obviously, CyberGhost is available on Windows, on Mac, on iOS, on Android, smart television, on gaming consoles, and even Linux. And for those who have multiple devices, family, or other in the same household, you can connect with a single CyberGhost virtual private network account on 7 different devices. For trust, visit Trustpilot, a leading reference site where it receives a near-perfect score with over 13,000 different reviews. So, especially for you on planeteraw, you will find in the description a link that will give you access to 84% off, which is only 1.95 euros per month. The equivalent of what? An almond croissant or a small espresso. Is my online freedom and anonymity worth more than an almond croissant? For me, it's not even a question. And then you also get 4 months free, as well as 45 days to cancel the thing if ever, in the end, you're not too into it anymore. So, take advantage of this thing. You're going to become transparent, invisible on the internet, and all your personal data will be preserved. That's for the little thank you. Also, thanks to those who subscribed to the channel or followed me on Instagram and Facebook. To have access to additional content from what I share here in video on YouTube, I will let Claude Auberlin speak, who will describe and explain to us this discovery of a cracometer that completely cancels out more than 2,500 years of erroneous history. Let's go.
It is clear that the Egyptologist, it is so much more interesting to discover 100 sarcophagi or 50 sarcophagi, and to have the whole world moving. It is clear that if I talk about the extraction of the obelisk, the whole world is not going to move with the cameras. And then they may not necessarily be passionate about it either. And moreover, these are techniques that are not necessarily part of their training. An Egyptologist? What they do, I don't understand at all. I can't read hieroglyphs as I'm not trained in that. I'm a technician, a researcher. I'd like to have recent graduates in my presence occasionally. I'm certain they'd quickly become enthusiastic. They have schools of an excellent level in Cairo, and this kind of things that I would have liked to propose to them. I tried to send a file which in principle is at the heart, but for the moment I have no feedback. It must be said that the corona doesn't help anything, that's for sure, but I would indeed like us to take a little more interest in it. Because, as proof, when we see all the reactions of people who want to know a little more about this thing, maybe we'll get there one day. By getting them involved in this work, we hope, fingers crossed.
But beyond the Egyptologists, there are also stonecutters or excavation directors with whom you have been in exchange, also finally in contact. I can't remember. I think it was a person who was in...
It's someone I had on the line, a brilliant man who does a lot of work. He still told me that he didn't agree with my theory, which I
can understand.
The size either. Besides, we don't agree on my hypothesis about abrasion. According to him, it doesn't stick. I can accept that. I won't go against it. However, he told me that in the discussion, he told me that
when he didn't agree with your theory on abrasion, what was the counteroffer, if I may ask?
Simply that, according to him, if there is abrasion, which is very consistent, the surfaces, the bowls would be smoother. He's not entirely wrong, but this form of bowl, in my opinion, cannot be successful. Also uniform throughout this career with impact blows. So here we don't agree at all. We'll go back there. It raised suspicions. I need to check some other things. We will go back there with an electron microscope. We will take some readings when we can do it. So there are people who are absolutely convinced that this extraction, according to the method suggested by Mr. Engelbach, the dolerite balls, obviously there are thousands of them on site. They must have been used for something. For my part, I'm not convinced because I have other elements. Yeah, if you want, we can engage them since you pointed me in that direction. On the surface of this obelisk, you have bracing, to put it simply, small cracks. There are two that are several meters long, which penetrate at, let's say, between 15 and 30 degrees. I would even say between 20 and 30 degrees into the obelisk. And which are therefore, it seems, the reasons for having abandoned this site, because the obelisk began to crack. So there, I still made some amazing discoveries. So there are two on top, there's another one on this side of the vertical trench, and I really analyzed that. We still spent tens of hours on this field, and I realized something that has never been mentioned. Well, this joint that I couldn't represent on the model, but there is one that goes like this in this direction. Well, this joint, this little crack all along the crack. Look closely at the photos. You can see there is a basin, but a continuous basin.
I will try to find photos good enough to illustrate what you're saying.
All of this is contemporary to the building then. They realized, of course, that there was a crack, and they wanted to check its possible impact on the giant. So they dug bowls all along this crack. What's extraordinary? Take a close look at the photos. I deeply regret that it was never discussed. At the end, when the crack stops, to penetrate into the obelisk, they shaped a crack gauge by abrasion. You're going to laugh. It's a modern technical term, but I don't know any other. When you have a cathedral, and there, I know what. I also speak from having visited a very large number.
And painted. There are also dozens of them painted.
Yes, okay, because drawing is also one of my passions. When we realize that a building is moving, which happens very often, a spanking, etc., we stick crack meters. So either it's a small plaster plate, or it's a glass plate, or it's a slider that slides over each other, or now it's electronic devices. I don't know how it works. This is to see if the crack continues to move. This was created 3,500 years ago. After 3,500 years, I closely inspected it and found it hadn't moved a micron. It's still interesting, though.
Meaning the crack might not have been as threatening as we thought.
That's my new theory on that. These two cracks, in no way, I'm taking all my precautions, these two cracks, in my opinion, would not have threatened this obelisk in any way. Especially since when you visit the Karnak site or other places where there are standing obelisks, sometimes there are some serious angles missing. So there had to be a reason for these angles to give way. Either they broke it while lifting, which I don't believe, or over time. Cracks, micro cracks from the time caused some angles to give way. I briefly mentioned these two small cracks with their crack per meter, each time at the end, vertically, roughly halfway. I don't remember very well at what distance. There is another fault that it is more than 2,50 meters, 3 meters high, roughly in the middle of the obelisk. And there, all the interpretations have been wrong, until now. We wondered why these bulges, well, they are there too, they have gone along. A fault that it is more threatening because it already enters on all the vertical it enters, it penetrates into the obelisk. And they dug very deeply, I don't know, roughly 10 or 15 centimeters deep. They dug cavities. That on one side of the fault. This to keep the other side in condition, to see what happens, so that visually they can realize if it's a fatal fault for the monolith or not. There you go, and at the very top, when we're in the ditch, we're about at this height. There's a new crack meter again. So what is it? A crack meter from 3,900 years ago. Well, it's on one, let's say, 18 to 20 centimeters long. It's a half sausage that they engraved, straddling the crack. This to see if it can move or not. This fault hasn't shifted even a micron. Therefore, these were natural faults in the stone, and I am no longer sure today that this site was abandoned for these reasons. But that's beyond my abilities. Historically, we would need to see what happened at that time on an economic, social, etc. level. This is to try to get as close as possible to the truth. Here are a few details about these elements that have never been proposed or suggested either. Extremely important, Yan. Extremely important. This is where I continue to defend my abrasion theory. These basins that have been dug across these faults, I have looked at them closely. And when I say closely under a magnifying glass, when we make this kind of cavity by impact with a ball of dolerite, at some point we're gonna have to hit the crack. And by constantly hitting the crack, the angles will break. And we're going to have a completely hatched crack from a splinter due to the shock. We didn't dig these elements by impact, neither on top nor vertically. Everything is complete, I'm absolutely certain. I have full confidence at this point. Finally, I can
Be wrong, you?
are sure you can be wrong. What I mean by that is that I always tend to get a little carried away out of passion, even though I always mean by that. It's just a hypothesis, and it will always be just a hypothesis. But with dolerite balls, we're gonna break the angle, and it would still be visible 3,500 years later. However, these angles that are edge to edge do not have a millimeter of breakage, and this quality of junction can only be obtained by friction and abrasion.